Welcome back once again to another Battlebots review. It's episode 9, let's not waste any time. This is the second time I've had to record this with my computer blue screen. Let's get into the review. So the intro was this crazy pizza advert parody. I can say it's not that I laughed from it, but I was just so entranced watching it. It really was amazing just how bizarre it was. Thank you, Battlebots! Chris and Getty then introduce us proper, and the fight card as always looked exciting. Gruff versus Witch Doctor seemed like it would be a wild fight to start things off. Scorpios versus Swordblades I was certain was going to be an amazing driving match, and of course, the main event of Endgame versus Hypershop was going to be a short but brutal bloodbath. I could just feel it. I was so excited for this. Now, Witch Doctor comes out with some forks to help get underneath Gruff. It's interesting to see, given that they usually rely entirely on the spinner's reach. Though I imagine in this case, given that Gruff is such a brick, maybe they're just hoping to get as much bite in as possible. The match begins, and Witch Doctor quickly ends up ripping one of the wedgelets off of Gruff. After some more sparks, they get another massive hit in, and Gruff just keeps going like it's nothing. It's truly remarkable just how tough this robot is. It feels like you could fire missiles at it and it would somehow keep going. Gruff's other wedgelet ends up getting pretty badly damaged as Witch Doctor keeps just getting some massive shots in. Witch Doctor is just gunning for them. Witch Doctor rams Gruff into the screws, followed by another massive set of spinner blows, sending Gruff up into the air, with one causing the flamethrower to be destroyed. Flames just went everywhere. Witch Doctor dismantles Gruff and then sends them over the screws onto the upper deck with one last almighty shot, and due to the way that Gruff landed, they were unable to self-right. Witch Doctor had an awesome performance in this fight. It was short but so sweet. Witch Doctor is clearly still one of the best vertical spinners in the competition. Even with all the crazy robots like Endgame and Riptide, Witch Doctor still stands as one of the best, as they now stand at 3-0. Next up was Malice versus Valkyrie. Now they don't waste any time as they cut straight to them entering the bots into the arena. Well, okay, they had to hold off for an ad break, but you get what I mean. You know, they are cutting right to the action in the show. Malice has come out with a 50-pound spinner bar and apparently some additional armor, which I knew they would need against a robot like Valkyrie. Valkyrie, meanwhile, seemed to have this tri-tip spinner, or maybe I was just looking at it wrong, but it did look very nice as well. There was no forks or anything like that. They're going for that old school approach, which I thought would ultimately work best for them. The match begins, and Malice raced right out, but stopped before crashing, so ultimately both robots were able to get up to speed. There were some exchanges back and forth, and at first I thought Valkyrie was getting the better of it, but Malice was getting some very nice shots as well, and the damage began to build. Valkyrie's armor began to start denting against Malice, and then with one last almighty shot from Malice, they sent the disc of Valkyrie clean off. I can't believe it. That's the kind of stuff I usually expect to see in Robot Arena 2. Unfortunately, the good times end for Malice as their weapon and one half of their drive dies not long after, and then Valkyrie loses one half of its own drive. Now, the way that the referees judge locomotion now is different. Back in the day, if you drove on only with one wheel, then they would count you out. However, now they typically count any form of movement as still being able to go. However, if both robots are stuck like this and unable to contact each other, then it'll force a double count out, which is what happens here. Which means that the decision ultimately ends up going to the judges. The decision ends up split, but ultimately went to Valkyrie, which honestly kind of shocked me after the legendary shot from Malice. I do agree with Lucy Doo that the fight was incredibly close, but I was definitely siding with Bunny when she mentioned that she wanted to use the appeals process, which is the first time we get to see it this season, I'm pretty sure. For those who are unaware, now one of the new systems in Battlebots this season is the appeals process. Basically, if a judge's decision is just that bad, you can say, hey, I don't agree with this, I want it looked at, I think my robot won. Your story will be heard out, there'll be considerations, were you actually correct? And if so, the judge's decision will be reversed and you will get the point. But if they stand by their decision, then that is it. You cannot make any more appeals. So it's a very risky move, but I felt Bunny was in the right there, especially because it is pointed out that Malice's weapon does come back to life, which I think is kind of interesting, meaning that in terms of damage, only one of them lost their weapon, quite literally. After the fight, we get to see Mike Jeffries of Bombshell, who is now the match steward, as Bunny explains why she feels the decision should be reconsidered, and I want to give a little side tangent to just say, I'm really happy about all the previous Roboteers and veterans that are working at Battlebots. You know, the judges have the likes of Fon Davis of Masamecha Catbot, Lisa Winter of Tentamushi, Derek Young of Complete Control. Of course, Battlebots is ran by Trey Roski and Greg Munson behind machines such as La Machine and Ginsu. You've got Tom Gutteridge behind the scenes who helped get the Robot Wars TV show off the ground and now is helping with Battlebots. You've got Mark Satrakian who was behind a whole host of robots such as Mechadon and the Master, and you've got Pete Abramson who worked on Ronin. It's just great to see Battlebots showing a huge amount of respect to the people who have dedicated so much time and love into this sport. Even after they stop competing, they're still able to contribute and keep the sport alive, which is, it's just fun to see. I'm glad Battlebots does that. Anyway, we move on to the next fight now between Mad Catter and Big Dill, and it's a battle of the mini-bots as well, as both robots just come out with a whole host of them. I doubt the mini-bots will have much effect, but it is just fun to see so many little robots roaming around. It kind of makes me wish that Battlebots Dill did rumbles so we could have the effect of so many robots roaming around, but full-size ones. I think that'd be so much fun. The battle begins, and Mad Catter and Big Dill actually let the mini-bots battle first. They then shortly come in afterwards, and after an initial exchange, it's actually Big Dill that gets the upper hand, sending Mad Catter flying as they bounce around and actually lose a fork in the process. Mad Catter does manage to get some shots in return, as the weapon is roaring, and the poor mini-bots are just getting decimated in the crossfire. Big Dill's actually doing very well as they get on the Mad Catter again, getting in some shots, but Mad Catter's superior firepower is definitely testing Big Dill's durability. Big Dill's, I think, taking more punishment in this fight than I think we've seen in any of their previous fights. Mad Catter does back away after being briefly wedged by a mini-bot, and gets a nice shot in on Big Dill, which does look a lot worse for wear, but is still keeping the fight going. Mad Catter is just getting more aggressive, however. Mad Catter pushes Big Dill, which its forks get stuck in the kill source slot, allowing Mad Catter to get another great shot in. A brief lift from Big Dill once it's free, and then there was just one more shot from Mad Catter as the fight goes to the judges. The fight goes to Mad Catter, and honestly, this fight was incredible. The mini-bots in the beginning was silly but fun to watch, but the big bots, as always, were the stars of the show. Both robots took extensive damage, but neither died, and both just showed that they're extremely capable. Mad Catter, as always, is extremely punishing, but Big Dill had its best performance to date. I'd argue that this could potentially be my fight of the night. Next up was Jackpot versus Ribot. Ribot was going in with their undercutter, which in my opinion was their strongest option to go with against Jackpot, as I feel Jackpot isn't that good at dealing with horizontal spinners. And Ribot, as long as it doesn't die, I felt that they had a good shot. When the buzzer sounded, Jackpot was a little apprehensive while Ribot came in with some blows. Ribot quickly took out the mini-bot, but Jackpot in return took out a wheel. Ribot then takes out one half of Jackpot's front, and these bots are taking huge chunks out of each other as Jackpot takes out the other left wheel. Now, Jackpot ends up avoiding Ribot despite the clear upper hand, before finally going in for a good shot, flipping Ribot over. Ribot is struggling. With only half its drive, it is not able to do much of anything. And Jackpot is still being extremely apprehensive before they push Ribot into the screws. Ribot looked down, but they started crab walking back out. Jackpot does try to get a killing blow, which is so powerful that it causes itself to flip over. Ribot continues to live, and Jackpot eventually comes in for some more. Jackpot's drive then suddenly half dies as well, which leads to both robots crab walking, and once again another double countout begins. However, the countdown stops as Jackpot's drive does manage to come back, leading the 3 minutes to end and it going to the judges. The judges end up giving it to Jackpot, which honestly I can agree with. This really was a fight where, depending on which half I look at, my opinion varies quite a bit. The beginning was a crazy fun fight with both robots tearing each other apart. The second half, however, was just hampered by Ribot being unable to do much and Jackpot being overly gun-shy. Don't get me wrong, I totally understand why Jackpot wouldn't want to rush in case Ribot got a lucky shot that took them out. I just wish the damage and chaos could have continued. It's that thing again of, I get why you do this strategy, but I want to see carnage. Next up was Scorpios versus Sawblade, which was another fight I was so excited to see. It's been great to get to see, two robots that are the pinnacle of a lesser used weapon type coming to blows, with Scorpios and Sawblades pretty much the pioneers of the hammer saw. And it was, at the very least in the Battlebots reboot, they were the pioneers of the hammer saw. Now Scorpios comes out with a heavier fork setup and the Overkill blade? Overkill will be coming to the Destructathon and is a legendary classic Battlebot. And so I could see this was a bit of an interesting bit of promotion there, but I'll admit, I was a little disappointed, given that I was hoping for a hammer saw on hammer saw fight, But my disappointment was admittedly balanced out by the awe of this strategy. I didn't think it would work, but I was interested to see what their thought process was. Sawblades meanwhile came out with additional armor to deal with overhead attacks. I have to feel they were planning for a hammer saw and not a thwackbot blade. Anyway, the fight begins and Sawblades isn't spinning up the hammer saw at first, meaning that Scorpios does manage to get a nice blow in with the blade. After tipping Scorpios over, however, Sawblades attacks the underside and Scorpios, from my guessing, likely due to the thin blade, is just unable to self-right. Sawblades lets them get counted out as they get 2 shots in on the Overkill blade, nearly completely decapitating it. Apparently Jameson Go just really wanted to take a piece of the Overkill blade home. I can't blame him, it is a wonderful bit of kit, honestly. But man, that fight was disappointing. I hope that sometime in the future we'll get to see a rematch where we'll get to see them come hammer saw to hammer saw. Don't be wrong, I love that Scorpios tried to be a little bit almost memey with the way that it came out with the Overkill blade. But man, it really underdelivered. I was hoping for another legendary fight like Overhaul versus Claw Viper and Beta versus Shatter. Ah well, there's always next season. Anyway, the main event hype package comes out a little bit early this time. The endgame team acknowledged that they made a crucial driving mistake and even roast each other a bit, but their confidence in their robot is still very strong. Hypershop, meanwhile, is one of the earlier notable vertical spinners in the Battlebots reboot, at least in my opinion, and it's crazy to think that the show has been back since 2015, with the reboot nearly being 8 years old now. Despite some rocky times, Hypershop seems to be back on the up and up, returning to a fearsome status once more as one of the better verts in the competition, and beating Endgame would leave no doubt in anyone's mind, but that's easier said than done. Safe to say that this had me very interested to see how this would go. The reboot's been going on long enough now that you could almost see this as a classic Battlebot coming up against a modern Battlebot. But let's not dwell on the passage of time before we all start feeling really old. Next up was Ripperoni vs Hijinks, with Bunny Sauriold coming to join the action on commentary. Like I said, I love this and I hope they do this every season from now on. Again, it's just a lot of fun. The builders have their own little spark, and they're clearly passionate about what they're talking about. Now, they do go on to elaborate that the decision was reversed. Bunny's appeal was successful, and I can see why the judges had the initial decision that they did. Clearly, they thought the same thing I did, which was that both weapons were disabled, which would have left it either way, but I still would have lent towards Malice winning in either case, so I'm ultimately happy that the appeal was successful, so that was good. I'm glad to have gotten an update there. Now, onto the fight itself. While I think Hijinks has some amazing potential, I was certain that they were going to get absolutely torn apart by a terrifying Ripperoni. Ripperoni comes out with some sort of anti-horizontal front, which didn't look like much, but then again their wedgelet setup seems to work as well, so if they could keep Hijinks from getting up to speed, I could see it working. Now the match begins and Ripperoni rushes, but then stops as both robots get up to speed. Ripperoni then ends up sending Hijinks up into the air with one almighty blow. Hijinks keeps going, however, and actually manages to wedge Ripperoni with the tail. That tail is really good at getting under opponents. I'm surprised at how good it is. However, unfortunately, with that initial shot from Ripperoni, it seems that the bar has stopped working, so all Hijinks can really do is try to delay the inevitable for long enough to get the judge's decision. And unfortunately for them, Ripperoni keeps tearing them apart, quite literally, as while Hijinks refused to die, it was getting mangled and disfigured after some almighty powerful spinner shots. Hijinks had a brief spark of life from the spinner, but it was very brief. Between the fire, the bits of armor on top of the sides of Hijinks popping off, and all kinds of additional damage, it was a miracle Hijinks lasted as long as it did, but that was the end of it. Man, this was yet another amazing showcase from Ripperoni. It was fairly clear who would win, but I don't think anyone expected it to be this good and this one-sided. At the same time, I have to give it a Hijinks for refusing to die, even with the absolute carnage it endured. After Big Dill and Hijinks had kind of a weak fight, their reliability seemed to come into question, both of them actually have done really well to try and assuage those fears in this episode. Now, Ripperoni, meanwhile, looks like it might be a genuine giant nut contender. As long as that weapon works, it seems to be unstoppable, though I think Copperhead will easily be their toughest match. It's a solid robot, it's got a pretty powerful spinner, and no force to get stuck in the kill saw. So it's going to be interesting to see how they'll fare against Copperhead, which I think is going to be extremely exciting. But now it's time for the main event! Endgame versus Hypershop. Endgame has a fork addiction or something. I thought their wedgelet setup was practically impenetrable, but they just had to break it up with 2 long forks. Don't be wrong, I see the strategy, and it does work out for them, spoiler alert. Now, I gotta say, I love the entrance Hypershop made with Will Bales and the like having these sunglasses. It was a slight jab at Endgame, and the sunglasses unironically looked kind of awesome. They also show how this is actually a rematch, funnily enough. I have a feeling Kenny was more annoyed than he was letting on in that replay, as when that bit of the arena hit him in the face. Thank goodness for professionalism, because I don't think either team wants to square up against Kenny Florian. The fight begins with Hypershop rushing out and Endgame getting caught on the floor. Still, when the robots clash, Endgame ends up getting the better of it, tipping Hypershop over. Hypershop begins to panic. They really do struggle when upside down, and end up running into Endgame upside down, causing a massive clash. Endgame ends up losing a wheel as they get sent up into the air. Endgame has also lost a fork, and Endgame then goes for another wheel, taking that one out as well. Hypershop, when attempting to get back on their feet, actually end up getting stuck on their side, which was a shame, but what a redemption for Endgame after their last fight. Endgame is such a brutal robot. I have to imagine that after the Ripperoni fight, Endgame is going to do whatever it can to avoid a similar mess up, and that just makes them all the more dangerous. But the fight was a little bit disappointing. Just as it was getting good, just as it was getting really exciting, it was over. Then again, I don't know what Hypershop could have done after this point, so I guess it's probably for the best that it ended. Overall, I'd say this was a very strong episode. Getting to see the appeals process come into play was interesting, and the fights for the most part were incredibly exciting. Robots like Ripperoni and Endgame were incredible, while fights like Mad Catter vs Big Dill and Malice vs Valkyrie were great endurance tests. I highly recommend checking this episode out. Anyway, if you enjoyed this review, please be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. Share this video around with your friends if you could, that'd be super appreciated. And hey, comment, let me know what you thought of this episode of Battlebots. With that all being said, I'll see you all next time. Bye guys!